A millionaire abandons his pregnant wife, believing in a betrayal that never happened. Defenseless, she is left alone in the middle of a plan that goes beyond what it seems. While he moves on, the truth begins to emerge in a disturbing way. But when he decides to return, it may already be too late to recover everything. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. Continuing. The light rain of Curitiba fell on the penthouse windows, like tears that Helena could no longer shed. Her eyes were dry, but her throat burned with words that were never said, with truths that no one wanted to hear. Marcelo was on the other side of the room, his back to her, looking at the city lit up below as if searching for answers in the lights that flickered in the night. It had been 3 hours since everything had collapsed. 3 hours since he arrived home, holding a brown envelope with photographs she had never seen before. 3 hours since the word betrayal was thrown into the air like a final sentence, without the right to a defense, without space for explanation. Helena tried to speak, tried to show that it made no sense, that she would never be capable of something like that. But Marcelo didn't want to listen. He simply repeated the same phrases, as if he had memorized a script that someone had written for him. The photographs showed her in places she never frequented, next to a man she had never seen in her life. They were convincing images, she had to admit. The angle, the light, the composition, everything seemed too real to be contested with words alone. But Helena knew the truth. She knew she had never betrayed her husband. She knew those images were an elaborate lie, a cruel trap. The problem was that Marcelo didn't want to know the truth. He wanted to believe in the betrayal, because somehow it justified something inside him that Helena couldn't understand. She moved her hand to her belly, feeling there the discreet presence of a new life beginning to form. 2 weeks ago, when the test came back positive, Helena had planned a special surprise to tell Marcelo. She imagined a candle-lit dinner, perhaps a small box with baby shoes, something that would make that moment unforgettable. Now, in the midst of chaos, the pregnancy seemed like just another weight, one more complication in a situation that was already completely out of control. Marcelo Albuquerque was one of the most respected businessmen in Curitiba. At 38 years old, he commanded an empire of construction and development companies that his father had started decades ago. He was meticulous, rational, always guided by numbers and contracts. Helena thought this practical side of him was balanced by the love they felt for each other. She thought that after 5 years of marriage, they had built something solid enough to withstand any storm. But now, she realized she was wrong. Marcelo was not willing to fight for the truth. He simply accepted the most convenient version, the one that released him from any emotional responsibility. It was Veronica who brought the envelope. Veronica Machado, Marcelo's executive assistant for almost 10 years, the woman who knew every detail of his routine, every commitment, every important decision. Helena never liked her much, but she always respected her professional competence. Veronica was efficient, discreet, and, in everyone's eyes, completely dedicated to her work. That afternoon, she appeared in Marcelo's office with the expression of someone carrying a burden that was too heavy. She said she needed to show him something important, something that had come to her anonymously, but that he needed to know. Marcelo opened the envelope and saw the photographs. Veronica stood beside him in silence, but Helena noticed a strange glint in her eyes, a contained satisfaction that didn't match the gravity of the situation. When Helena entered the room minutes later, called in a hurry, it was already too late. The decision had already been made. Marcelo looked at her with a coldness Helena had never seen before, as if she were a stranger, someone he didn't truly know. Now, alone in that immense room, Helena tried to process what was happening. Marcelo finally turned around, and what she saw on his face wasn't anger. It was disappointment. A disappointment so deep that it seemed to have erased any trace of the man she loved. He said he wanted her out of the house that very night. He said he didn't want to see her anymore, that he didn't want to hear explanations, that everything was already decided. Helena felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She tried once more to explain that it was a lie. She tried to say she was pregnant, that she was expecting his child, that it changed everything. But Marcelo just shook his head, as if even that made no difference. He said he no longer believed anything that came out of her mouth, that the trust was broken and there was no going back. Helena realized she was fighting alone, that there was no room for dialogue, for understanding, for anything beyond the sentence that had already been pronounced. The rain increased in intensity, and the sound on the glass became louder, almost deafening. Helena grabbed her purse, feeling her legs tremble. She had nowhere to go. She had no money of her own. Everything was in Marcelo's name. She had abandoned her own career years ago when he suggested it would be better that way, that she could dedicate herself to other things, that she didn't need to work. At the time, it seemed like a gesture of care, of protection. Now she understood it had been a trap, a way to keep her dependent, fragile, without her own voice. She left the penthouse without looking back, carrying only her purse and the clothes on her back. The elevator descended slowly, and with every floor that passed, Helena felt the weight of reality crushing her chest. When she reached the ground floor, the doorman greeted her as always, never imagining that would be the last time he would see her there. She stepped out into the street, and the rain wet her face, mixing with the tears that finally began to fall. She walked aimlessly through the streets of Curitiba, passing places she used to frequent when she still had a life that made sense. The city felt different now, colder, more distant, as if it had also turned its back on her. Helena thought of her mother, who had passed away years ago, and felt a deep longing to have someone to run to, someone who would believe in her without question. But she was alone, completely alone, carrying within her a life she didn't even know how to protect yet. It was when she passed in front of a bakery in the Agua Verde neighborhood that she realized she was hungry. She went in, ordered a coffee with milk and a pão na chapa, and sat at a table in the corner. The place was simple, welcoming, and the smell of fresh bread brought a small sense of comfort in the midst of the chaos. The attendant, an elderly lady with grey hair and a kind smile, brought the order and asked if everything was okay. Helena just nodded, unable to speak, fearing that words would bring back the tears. While she ate, Helena tried to organize her thoughts. She needed to find a place to sleep, she needed to think about the next day, she needed to make some kind of plan. But everything seemed too foggy, too distant. The only certainty she had was that she couldn't go back. Marcelo had made it clear that there was no room for her in that house, in that life. And even if there were, Helena knew she couldn't stay beside someone who didn't believe in her, who condemned her without even trying to understand what had really happened. She remembered an old college classmate, Renata, who lived in a small apartment in the Porto neighborhood. It had been years since they spoke, but maybe Renata could help, at least for one night. Helena grabbed her cell phone, but when she tried to make the call, she realized the number no longer existed. She tried other people, friends she thought she could still count on, but no one answered. It was late, past 10 at night, and the world seemed to have closed in completely around her. The lady from the bakery approached again, cleaning the surrounding tables. She looked at Helena with a tenderness that made her heart tighten. Without saying anything, the woman placed another pão na chapa on the table, along with a glass of orange juice. Helena tried to refuse, but the lady just smiled and said it was okay, that the night was difficult for everyone, and that sometimes a simple gesture made all the difference. It was at that moment, sitting in a humble bakery receiving kindness from a stranger, that Helena understood her life had changed completely. There was no more luxury, no more security, nothing left but the uncertain present. But she also realized she still had something inside her, a strength she didn't know existed, a determination that began to form in the midst of the pain. She didn't know how, but she knew she needed to survive, for herself, and for the life growing in her womb. When the bakery closed, the lady offered for Helena to stay there for the night, in a small storage room in the back where there was an old sofa. Helena accepted, grateful for that unexpected mercy. She lay down on that sofa, listening to the noises of the city outside, and realized that was just the beginning of a journey she never imagined she would have to face. Marcelo, at that same moment, was alone in the penthouse looking at the photographs scattered across the table. Something inside him began to bother him, a small voice whispering that maybe he had been too fast, that maybe he should have listened to Helena before making that decision. But pride was greater, and he pushed that thought away, convincing himself that he had done the right thing, that he had protected himself from a betrayal that seemed so real. On the other side of the city, Veronica Machado hung up the phone after a quick conversation. A discreet smile played on her lips as she put some papers away in a locked drawer. Everything was going exactly as she had planned. Now it was only a matter of time until Marcelo realized he needed someone by his side, someone who truly understood him, someone who had always been there, patiently waiting for the right opportunity. Helena, curled up on that old sofa, finally closed her eyes. Sleep did not come easily, but when it did, it brought confused dreams where she ran through endless streets, trying to reach something that always escaped her hands. When she woke up, she would have to face a new day, a new reality, and discover if she was strong enough to survive what lay ahead. The light of dawn entered through the cracks in the storage room, and Helena woke up with a sore body and an even heavier mind. For a moment, she thought it had all been just a horrible nightmare, but reality imposed itself when she smelled the fresh bread coming from the bakery and realized where she was. The lady who took her in the night before was already working, and Helena could hear the movement of the first customers arriving for breakfast. She got up slowly, straightened her wrinkled clothes, and tried to compose herself minimally. She didn't have a toothbrush, she had nothing but what was in her purse. When she left the storage room, the lady was behind the counter, preparing fresh coffee. She looked at Helena with the same affection as the day before and said she had set aside breakfast for her, that she needed to eat well, especially now. Helena sat at the same corner table and accepted the bread with butter and the coffee the lady brought. The woman introduced herself as Donna Celia and said she noticed Helena was going through a difficult time, but that she didn't have to tell her anything if she didn't want to. That simple gesture, that kindness without expectations, made Helena feel a gratitude she didn't know how to express in words. While she ate, Helena tried to think about the next step. She needed to find a place to stay, she needed money, she needed to start rebuilding some foundation to survive. She remembered she had some credit cards in her purse, but when she tried to use one of them to pay for the coffee, the machine declined. She tried another, and again the transaction was denied. Her heart raced. She borrowed Donna Celia's cell phone and called the bank, but the automated message informed her that all her cards had been blocked at the request of the account holder. Marcelo had acted quickly. Not satisfied with kicking her out of the house, he also cut off any access to financial resources. Helena felt her throat close. She was literally with nothing. Not a cent, not a roof, not any form of sustenance. The feeling of helplessness was so great that she had to hold back tears to avoid collapsing right there in front of Donna Celia. The lady noticed what was happening and said Helena didn't need to worry about the coffee, that it was okay. She also offered for her to stay a few more days in the storage room until she could get organized. Helena accepted, feeling both grateful and humiliated by depending on the charity of a stranger. After breakfast, Helena went out into the street with a clear objective: to find work. She walked through the neighborhood, entering stores, restaurants, small businesses, offering herself for any role. She had a degree in administration, but that didn't seem to make a difference now. What she needed was something immediate, something that would put money in her pocket as soon as possible. The first store she tried was a women's clothing boutique. The owner looked her up and down, noticing the expensive but wrinkled clothes, the tired appearance, and said she didn't need anyone. Helena insisted, saying she would accept anything, even cleaning work or stock organization, but the woman just shook her head and said there were no vacancies. It was like that in almost every place. Some people were polite in their refusal, others were not. Helena began to notice a strange pattern. In some places, when she mentioned her full name, Helena Cardozo Albuquerque, people's expressions changed. It was as if they already knew who she was, as if they had already received some kind of instruction about her. In the late afternoon, exhausted and without results, Helena entered a small laundry in the Batel neighborhood. The owner, a middle-aged man named Seu Jorge, was arranging some clothes when she arrived. Helena asked if he needed help, and he looked at her with curiosity. He said he generally didn't hire anyone, but that one of the employees had just left, and he really needed someone. Helena felt a flicker of hope. Seu Jorge asked if she had experience with laundries, and she said no, but that she learned quickly and was willing to do anything. He thought for a moment, and then said she could start the next day, but that the pay would be only the minimum and per day worked. Helena accepted immediately, feeling that finally something was going right. When she left the laundry, Helena passed by a bank branch and decided to try to open her own account. She went in, took a number, and waited to be served. When it was her turn, she explained to the manager that she needed to open a simple checking account, something that would be hers alone. The manager asked for her documents, typed the information into the system, and after a few minutes called another employee. They spoke in low voices, and then the manager said that unfortunately it wouldn't be possible to open the account at that moment, as there were some restrictions in the system. Helena didn't understand. She asked what kind of restrictions, but the manager was evasive, saying only that it was something internal to the bank and that she should try another institution, but Helena knew that wasn't normal. She left the bank with the certainty that something was being done to sabotage her, to keep her isolated, without access to resources, without the possibility of getting back on her feet. She returned to the bakery at the end of the day, and Donna Celia had already prepared a plate of food for her. Helena ate in silence, trying to process everything that was happening. She realized now that she wasn't just fighting Marcelo's abandonment, but something bigger, more organized, more cruel. Someone was working behind the scenes to ensure she couldn't get up, that she remained vulnerable, without a voice, without power. That night, lying again on the storage room sofa, Helena thought about giving up. She thought about simply vanishing, leaving everything behind, maybe going to another city where no one knew her. But then she put her hand on her belly and remembered the life growing inside. That baby wasn't to blame for anything, didn't deserve to be born in the midst of chaos and defeat. Helena knew she needed to be strong, not for herself, but for that child who depended completely on her. The next day she arrived early at the laundry. So Jorge welcomed her with a smile and began teaching her the basics of the job. It was heavy work, dealing with dirty clothes, operating industrial machines, ironing, folding, organizing. Helena's back ached. Her hands became red and rough, but she didn't complain. She needed that money, she needed that opportunity. During breaks, she talked with Seu Jorge, who was a simple but wise person. He told her that he had set up that laundry with a lot of effort, that he had started from scratch and built everything little by little. He said that life had its ways of testing people, but that those who didn't give up always found a way. Helena listened to those words and felt they spoke directly to her, as if they were a reminder that it was possible to start over, even when everything seemed lost. After a week working at the laundry, Helena began to have a routine. She woke up early, worked all day, and returned to the bakery storage room at night. Donna Celia continued offering food and shelter, refusing any payment, saying only that Helena could pay her back when she was in a position to do so. It was a kindness Helena kept in her heart, knowing she would never forget those people who took her in when she needed it most. But the sabotage continued. Helena tried again to open an account at another bank, and again she was refused without a plausible explanation. She tried to rent a small room in a boarding house, but when the owner of the boarding house learned her name, she said there were no more vacancies. It was as if there were an invisible net around her, preventing her from moving forward, keeping her trapped in a condition of permanent fragility. One afternoon, while organizing clothes at the laundry, Helena received a call on her cell phone. It was an unknown number. She answered cautiously, and the voice on the other end was a woman who identified herself as a lawyer. She said she represented Marcelo Albuquerque, and that she needed to inform Helena about the divorce proceedings that were being initiated. The lawyer was cold and direct, saying that Helena would have no right to anything since she had betrayed her husband, and that any attempt to contest it would be useless. Helena felt anger rise for the first time since everything had started. She said that accusation was false, that she had been deceived, that she never betrayed Marcelo, but the lawyer only replied that the evidence was overwhelming, and that it would be better for Helena to accept the situation without creating more problems. She hung up before Helena could say anything else. That night, Helena talked to Donna Celia about everything. She told the full story, from the marriage to the abandonment, including the fake photographs and the sabotage that continued to happen. Donna Celia listened in silence, and when Helena finished, the lady took her hands and said something that would be marked forever. It doesn't matter how much they try to push you down. What matters is if you choose to stay there or get up. The choice is always yours. Those words echoed inside Helena like a bell that finally rang at the right moment. She realized she was letting herself be carried by the current, passively accepting everything that was happening. But it didn't have to be that way. She could fight. She could seek the truth. She could rebuild herself in a way no one expected. On the weekend, Helena used the money she had managed to save at the laundry to buy some simple clothes at a thrift store. They weren't the designer clothes she used to wear, but they were clean, dignified, and made her feel a little more like herself. She also bought some basic hygiene materials and began to organize herself better, even within the limitations she had. Seu Jorge noticed her dedication, and at the end of the second week, offered a small increase in her daily pay. He said she was a great employee and that he was impressed by how quickly she learned. Helena thanked him, moved, knowing that every cent made a difference. It was during this period that Helena discovered something that would change the course of her reconstruction. While ironing clothes at the laundry, she noticed some sewing details that were poorly done on some pieces. Without thinking much, she took a needle and thread that Seu Jorge had in a drawer and fixed the seams, leaving the pieces impeccable. Seu Jorge saw the result and was impressed. He asked where she had learned that, and Helena said her mother was a seamstress and had taught her the basics when she was a child. That simple skill, which Helena had forgotten for years, came back to the surface like a seed that finally found fertile soil to germinate. Seu Jorge suggested that she could offer small repair and adjustment services, charging an additional amount from customers. Helena accepted the idea, and soon she began doing some extra work that brought in a little more money, which was always welcome. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Marcelo continued his routine as if nothing had changed. He worked, closed deals, maintained appearances. But at night, alone in the penthouse, he looked at the photographs that had destroyed his marriage and felt a growing unease. Something in those images was beginning to seem strange, artificial, but he still couldn't identify exactly what. Veronica, for her part, was always nearby, offering support, suggesting that Marcelo needed to move on, that he had made a mistake in trusting Helena, and that now he needed to focus on what really mattered. She made herself increasingly present, always available, always attentive, patiently waiting for Marcelo to realize that the right person had always been right beside him. Helena, that same night, was sewing a button on a shirt while Donna Celia prepared dinner. For the first time in weeks, she felt something like hope. It wasn't a grandiose hope. It wasn't the expectation that everything would go back to being as it was. It was something smaller, more real, more solid. It was the certainty that step by step, she was beginning to find her own path, built with her own hands. 3 months had passed since that rainy night that changed everything. Helena woke up now with a different purpose, more solid, more her own. Her belly was starting to round discreetly, and she could already feel small movements of the baby, like butterflies dancing inside her. Every time that happened, Helena smiled, reminding herself that she wasn't alone, that there was something bigger motivating every step she took. The work at the laundry continued, but the sewing repairs had become something special. Word spread through the neighborhood that there was someone skilled doing adjustments and repairs, and more customers sought Helena specifically. She fixed hems, adjusted waists, replaced zippers, recovered pieces that seemed lost. It was meticulous work that required patience and attention to detail, but Helena discovered she had a natural talent for it. Seu Jorge noticed the potential and suggested she set aside a corner of the laundry to work exclusively with sewing. He brought an old sewing machine that was stored in the back, and Helena cleaned it, adjusted it, and got it working. It wasn't a modern machine, but it served perfectly for what she needed. Gradually, that corner was transformed into something that felt truly hers, a space where she could create, repair, transform. It was around this time that Helena met Jessica, a young woman who worked at a fabric store in downtown Curitiba. Jessica walked into the laundry one day to pick up some clothes and saw Helena working at the machine. The two started talking, and Jessica was impressed by the quality of the work. She mentioned that the store where she worked had many scraps and fabric remnants that ended up being discarded, and asked if Helena would be interested. Helena saw an opportunity there. She took the scraps Jessica offered and began to experiment. First, she made small pouches and bags just to test her skills. Then, she moved on to larger pieces, bags, children's backpacks, cases. She used her creativity to combine colors and textures, transforming remnants into unique products full of personality. Donna Celia saw the first pieces and suggested that Helena try selling them at the craft fair that took place on Sundays at Praça do Japão. Helena felt insecure at first. She had never sold anything before, never exposed her work like that so open to people's judgment. But Donna Celia insisted, saying that nothing was gained by standing still, that one had to take risks to see what happened. The following Sunday, Helena sorted some pieces, put everything in a box and went to the fair. The day dawned clear and sunny, typical of Curitiba at the end of winter. Helena set up a small improvised table with a colorful cloth over it, arranged the bags and pouches attractively, and stayed there, waiting. The first few hours were slow. People passed by, looked. Some stopped to ask the price, but few bought. Helena began to think it had been a mistake, that maybe her work wasn't good enough. But then an elderly lady approached, picked up one of the bags, examined every detail, and asked if Helena did custom pieces. Helena said yes, and the lady ordered 3 bags with detailed specifications. It was the first real order, and Helena felt her heart race with emotion. After that lady, other people began to take interest. By the end of the day, Helena had sold almost half of the pieces she brought and had a list of orders for the coming weeks. From then on, Sundays at the fair became a routine. Helena woke up early, prepared the pieces, went to the square, and spent the day talking to customers, showing her work, making contacts. She discovered she liked it, the direct contact with people, seeing someone's satisfaction in finding exactly what they were looking for. Each sale wasn't just money, it was a confirmation that she was on the right path, that she was building something real with her own hands. With the money she began to save, Helena finally managed to rent a small room in a family house in the Capão Raso neighborhood. It wasn't much, just a space with a bed, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking a backyard with trees. But it was hers. For the first time in months, she had a place she could call her own, where she could close the door and have privacy. The owner of the house, Dona Lourdes, was a friendly widow who lived alone and enjoyed having company. Donna Celia was happy to see Helena gaining her independence, but made it clear that the bakery's doors would always be open. Helena knew she would never forget those first days when she had nothing and was welcomed by people who didn't even know her. That forever marked the way she saw the world and people. The sewing business grew slowly but consistently. Helena invested every cent she earned into better materials, proper tools, small improvements. She bought a better sewing machine, invested in quality threads, and started taking online courses in sewing techniques and design. She discovered she had a knack for learning, that she absorbed knowledge like a sponge and could apply it all quickly to her creations. Jessica became a close friend, helping Helena get fabrics at better prices, giving trend suggestions, and promoting her work to others. It was through Jessica that Helena got her first big order. A children's clothing store wanted 30 personalized backpacks to sell as an exclusive product. Helena was excited and at the same time nervous. It was a large volume, a challenge greater than anything she had done until then. For 2 weeks she worked non-stop. She woke up at 5 in the morning, sewed before going to the laundry, then came back and sewed until late at night. So Jorge noticed her dedication and offered more flexibility with her hours, saying Helena could work fewer hours at the laundry if she needed to focus on the orders. It was another gesture of kindness from someone who believed in her, who saw her potential and wanted to help her grow. When she delivered the 30 backpacks, Helena felt immense pride. Each piece was perfect, carefully made with attention and care. The store owner was so satisfied that she placed a new order on the spot, this time for 50 units. Helena knew she was facing a real opportunity to turn that into something bigger, into a real business. It was at this time that Helena's belly was already quite visible. She was 5 months pregnant, and although she was healthy, she began to feel the weight of the intense work. Donna Lourdes, always attentive, suggested she look for a health center to get proper prenatal care. Helena followed the advice and began attending appointments, where she received guidance about the pregnancy and the care she needed to take. Each ultrasound was a moment of emotion, seeing that little being growing inside her, hearing the strong heartbeat, knowing that in a few months she would have a child in her arms. All of this brought a mixture of joy and responsibility. Helena knew she needed to accelerate the building of the business, that she needed to guarantee a solid financial base before the baby was born. It was then that she made an important decision. She talked to Seu Jorge and said she needed to leave the laundry to dedicate herself completely to the sewing work. Seu Jorge understood, although he was sad to lose her as an employee. He said she would always be welcome and that he admired her courage to follow her own path. With more time available, Helena intensified production. She created a small line of products with their own identity, always using scraps and fabric remnants, giving new life to materials that would be discarded. Her pieces began to be known for this sustainable characteristic, for transforming what would be trash into something beautiful and useful. But not everything was easy. Helena discovered that some suppliers refused to sell materials to her when they found out her full name. It was the same sabotage as before, only now in a different context. She learned to work around this by using only her first name or asking Jessica to make the purchases for her. It was humiliating to have to hide, but it was necessary to keep moving forward. There were also moments of physical exhaustion. The pregnancy took its toll, and there were days when Helena woke up tired, with back pain, with nausea that wouldn't pass. But she couldn't stop. She had orders to fulfill, customers waiting, bills to pay. She learned to work even when she wasn't well, to push the body's limits without completely overstepping them. One afternoon, while sewing in the room she rented, Helena received a message from an unknown number. It was from someone who said they had seen her work at the fair and wanted to make a proposal. The person identified herself as the owner of a boutique in the Battelle neighborhood and was interested in selling Helena's pieces on consignment. Helena was suspicious at first, but decided to set up a meeting to learn more about the proposal. The boutique was small but elegant, specializing in original and sustainable products. The owner, a woman named Marina, explained that she was building a curation of local artisans and that Helena's work fit perfectly into the store's concept. She offered fair terms and said she believed in the potential of the pieces. Helena accepted, feeling she was taking another important step towards consolidating the business. That night, sitting in the backyard of Donna Lourdes' house, Helena looked at the stars and thought about everything that had happened in recent months. She had come out of the depths. She had built something from nothing. She had found strengths she didn't even know existed within her. The pain of abandonment was still there, but now it shared space with other things: pride, determination, hope. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Marcelo was in his office late at night examining old marriage documents. There was something that bothered him about the photographs, something he finally managed to identify. The dates. Some of the photos that supposedly showed Helena with another man had metadata that didn't match the occasions when she would have been in those places. It was a small, technical detail, but enough to plant a seed of real doubt. Veronica entered the office bringing coffee, as she always did when Marcelo stayed working late. She looked at the documents on the table and asked if everything was okay. Marcelo just said he was reviewing some old papers, nothing important. But Veronica noticed the tone in his voice, that hesitation that indicated things might not be going exactly as she had planned. Helena, at that same moment, placed her hand on her belly and felt the baby move. She smiled, knowing that soon she would have in her arms the reason for everything she was fighting to build. No matter what lay ahead, she was ready. She had learned to survive. Now she was learning to prosper, and nothing and no one would take that from her. The doubt that began as a small annoyance transformed into a silent obsession. Marcelo spent weeks reviewing every detail of the photographs, comparing dates, analyzing locations, looking for inconsistencies. The more he investigated, the more questions arose. How could Helena be in two places at the same time? Why did some of the photos have strangely professional quality, while others seemed captured in an amateur way? And most importantly, why had he never demanded a deeper investigation before making that drastic decision? The answer to the last question was the hardest to face. Marcelo knew he had acted on impulse, guided by a mixture of wounded pride and fear of confronting a truth that might be different from what he wanted to believe. It had been easier to accept the betrayal than to question his own judgment. Easier to expel Helena than to thoroughly investigate what had really happened. It was when he sought out an expert in forensic image analysis that the truth began to reveal itself irrefutably. The expert, a meticulous man named Fernando, examined each photograph with specialized equipment. After 2 days of analysis, he called Marcelo to show the results. The photographs had been digitally manipulated. They weren't crude montages, but sophisticated work done by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Fernando pointed to the details on the computer screen. There were inconsistencies in the lighting, pixels that didn't align correctly, shadows that didn't correspond to the position of the bodies. One of the photos showed Helena in a restaurant that, according to records, had only opened 3 months after the date the image was supposedly taken. Another showed her at an event that Marcelo knew perfectly well they had attended together, but the man beside her in the manipulated photo was completely different from him. Marcelo felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. It had all been a lie. Helena never betrayed him. Someone had constructed that elaborate farce, had deceived him completely, and he had been foolish enough to believe it without questioning. The nausea he felt at that moment wasn't physical. It was emotional. He had destroyed his marriage, abandoned his pregnant wife, ruined everything because of a lie he himself chose to accept. The next question was inevitable. Who had done it? Who would have the motive and the ability to create such an elaborate farce? Marcelo began to review every person who had access to his life, everyone who might have an interest in destroying his marriage. The list was short, but one person stood out: Veronica. At first, Marcelo resisted the idea. Veronica had worked with him for years. She was efficient, loyal, always there when he needed her. But the more he thought about it, the more things began to make sense. It was Veronica who brought the envelope with the photographs. It was she who was always around after the separation, offering support, suggesting he move on. It was she who, subtly, discouraged any attempt of his to question the narrative that had been built. Marcelo decided to investigate discreetly. He hired a private investigator to trace the origins of the envelope and the photographs. What he discovered confirmed his darkest suspicions. The envelope had been sent to Veronica by an image editing company that operated in another state, specialized in digital manipulation. The payment had been made through an account that, although registered in the name of a shell company, had indirect links to Veronica. The revelation was like a punch to the stomach. Veronica had orchestrated everything. She had created the fake evidence, delivered it to him at the right moment, manipulated his emotions to ensure he made the decision she wanted. And why? The answer was also clear now. Veronica was in love with him, or at least obsessed. She wanted to take Helena's place. She wanted to be the woman by his side, and she had removed the only obstacle that existed. Marcelo confronted Veronica one late afternoon in the empty office. He placed all the evidence on the table and watched her reaction. At first, Veronica tried to deny it, but faced with irrefutable evidence, her mask fell. She showed no regret. On the contrary, she said she had done it because she thought it was best for him, that Helena was never the right person, that she, Veronica, had always been there, always truly understood him. Marcelo felt a mixture of anger and disgust. He fired Veronica on the spot, threatening her with lawsuits if she didn't disappear completely from his life. Veronica left the office without looking back, but not before leaving one last sting. She said he could kick her out, but the damage was already done, that Helena would never forgive him, that he had lost everything on his own, not because of her. Veronica's words echoed in Marcelo's mind for days. She was right about one thing: the damage was done. He had abandoned Helena, left her pregnant and without resources, believed in lies without giving her the benefit of the doubt. Even if he proved now that everything was false, even if he showed he was deceived, would that change anything? Would it erase the pain he caused? Would it bring back the months Helena spent alone, fighting to survive? Marcelo tried to find out where Helena was. He used all the resources he had, hired investigators, searched records, but it was surprisingly difficult to find her. Helena had completely vanished from the social radar she used to frequent. There were no traces on social media, no credit cards being used, nothing to indicate where she might be. After weeks of searching, he finally got a lead. Someone mentioned seeing a woman similar to Helena selling crafts at a fair in the Agua Verde neighborhood. Marcelo went there on a Sunday, but when he arrived, it was too late. The fair was ending, and there was no sign of Helena. He asked some vendors, but no one seemed to know her by her full name. One lady only said there was a girl who sold beautiful bags, but she didn't know where she lived. Marcelo's frustration grew. He wanted to talk to Helena. He wanted to explain what he had discovered. He wanted to ask for forgiveness. But at the same time, a voice inside him questioned if he really had that right. After everything he did, after abandoning her in the cruelest way possible, did he deserve a second chance? Would Helena simply not be better off without him? This internal conflict paralyzed Marcelo. He oscillated between the need to find her immediately and the hesitation to face the consequences of his actions. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Marcelo plunged into work, trying to drown his guilt in meetings and business. But at night, alone in the penthouse he once shared with Helena, reality caught up with him mercilessly. He began to have nightmares. He dreamed he found Helena, but she simply turned her back and walked away. He dreamed of a crying baby, a child he would never know, who would grow up not knowing who his father was. He woke up in the middle of the night with his heart racing, in a cold sweat, feeling the crushing weight of choices he could no longer undo. It was during this period that Marcelo noticed something he had never noticed before. The penthouse was huge, luxurious, full of expensive things, but it was empty. Not of furniture or decoration, but of life, of warmth, of meaning. Helena had brought all of that. She had transformed that cold space into a home, and when she left, she took everything that really mattered with her. One morning, Marcelo opened a drawer looking for documents and found a small pink envelope. Inside was an ultrasound, the one Helena must have done before everything collapsed. The image showed a small developing dot, and in the bottom corner there was a handwritten note by Helena. 8 weeks. Marcelo calculated mentally. That meant that now, months later, the baby must have already been born, or be about to be born. That ultrasound image was the push Marcelo needed. He could no longer hesitate. He could no longer hide behind guilt and fear. He needed to find Helena. He needed to face what he had done, and more importantly, he needed to take responsibility for the son he helped create, but abandoned before he was even born. He intensified the search, this time with a different determination. It was no longer just about asking for forgiveness. It was about doing what was right, even if it was too late, even if Helena never wanted to see him again. He hired more investigators, offered rewards for information, set aside his pride and began asking openly for Helena in places she used to frequent. It was through a contact in the health field that he finally obtained concrete information. Helena had done prenatal care at a health center in the Capua Raso neighborhood. The baby had been born 3 weeks ago, healthy, a boy. Marcelo felt a wave of emotion so intense that he had to sit down. He was a father, he had a son, and he wasn't even present at the birth, didn't even know the child's name. He got an address, a house where Helena would be living. It was a simple house in a working-class neighborhood, very different from the luxury penthouse she had left behind. Marcelo went there several times, but never had the courage to knock on the door. He stayed across the street, watching from afar, seeing Helena enter and leave with the baby in her arms, seeing the life she had built without him. There was something different about her. It wasn't just her appearance, though she was thinner with shorter hair and simpler clothes. It was her posture, the way she walked, how she held the baby, how she interacted with the neighbors. Helena seemed stronger, more self-assured, more complete in a way he had never seen before. It was by observing her from afar that Marcelo understood the real dimension of what he had lost. It wasn't just the marriage that was gone. It was the chance to be part of that transformation, to be by her side while she became the incredible woman he saw now. It was the chance to know his son, to be present at the birth, to participate in the first moments of that child's life. Marcelo's hesitation cost him dearly. While he watched from afar, unable to take the final step, the days kept passing. Helena went on with her life, raising her son, working, building a routine that didn't include him. And the more time passed, the harder the idea became of simply appearing and expecting her to understand, to forgive, to make room for him in that new life she had built from scratch. Marcelo realized he was stuck in a cycle of guilt and paralysis. He wanted to fix the mistake, but he was afraid of causing more pain. He wanted to be near his son, but he felt he didn't deserve it. He wanted to talk to Helena, but he didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound pathetic or insufficient. And while he struggled with these internal demons, life kept happening, and the distance between him and the family he could have had only increased. 6 years had passed since that rainy night that changed everything. Curitiba remained the same city, but Helena's life was completely different. She was now in her own studio, a large and bright space in the Santa Felicidade neighborhood, where modern sewing machines worked alongside cutting tables, mannequins, and shelves full of carefully organized fabrics. The Helena Cardoso studio had become a reference in sustainable fashion in Curitiba. What started as small repairs and bags made from scraps transformed into a recognized brand, with a presence in stores throughout the city and even some orders from other states. Helena employed 5 seamstresses, all women who, like her, had stories of overcoming and starting over. Pedro was 6 years old now, a smart boy with curious eyes and a wide smile. He was in the first grade of a public school near the studio, where Helena made a point of taking him and picking him up every day. She had raised her son alone, but she never allowed him to miss what really mattered. Pedro grew up surrounded by love, solid values, and examples of work and dignity. On that Friday morning, Helena was reviewing the final details of a collection that would be presented at a sustainable fashion fair in São Paulo. It was an important moment, an opportunity to expand the brand's reach beyond Paraná. The pieces were impeccable, each telling a story through recycled fabrics and the creative design that became the signature of her work. Jessica, who was now her partner, entered the studio carrying coffee and warm pão de queijo. The two had become more than business partners. They were true friends, sisters by choice. Jessica had invested her savings in the studio when Helena decided to expand, and together they built something that went far beyond financial return. Sitting at the meeting table, they planned the final details of the trip to São Paulo. Pedro was excited because he was going along. It would be the first time he would visit another city. Helena looked at her son playing with fabric scraps in the corner of the studio and felt immense gratitude for everything she had achieved. It wasn't easy. There were nights when she cried from exhaustion, moments when she thought she wouldn't make it, but every obstacle overcome made her stronger. The house where they lived now was small but cozy, rented in a quiet neighborhood. Helena could have bought something of her own with the money the business generated, but she preferred to invest in the growth of the company, in training, in improvements that could benefit all the employees. She had learned that security was not in having things, but in having the capacity to build, to adapt, to create value with her own hands. The studio phone rang. It was Marina from the boutique that had been one of the first to believe in Helena's work. She was calling to say that a sustainable fashion magazine wanted to do a story on the studio, highlighting the story of overcoming behind the brand. Helena accepted, knowing that this kind of visibility could open even more doors. In the afternoon, while the seamstresses worked on the final pieces of the collection, Helena sat with Pedro to help him with his homework. The boy had difficulty with math, but loved to read and draw. Helena saw a bit of herself in him, that overflowing creativity, that need to express the world through colors and shapes. Pedro asked, as he had asked before, about his father. Helena was always honest within what was appropriate for his age. She said his father was in Curitiba, that he had made a big mistake when she was pregnant, but that this didn't diminish the love she had for Pedro. She also said that one day, when he was older, he could make his own choices about meeting his father or not. The boy accepted those answers with the simple wisdom of children. He had a family. He had his mother, who loved him unconditionally. He had Aunt Jessica, who pampered him. He had Grandma Celia from the bakery, who still made a point of saving special breads for him. He had Seu Jorge, who taught him how to fix things, and Dona Lourdes, who told old stories. Pedro grew up knowing that family wasn't just blood, but the people who chose to stay, who chose to care, who chose to love. That night, after putting Pedro to sleep, Helena sat in the small office she had at home and reviewed the studio's finances. The numbers were good, sustainable, showing consistent growth. She had achieved something that seemed impossible years ago. She had built real independence, not just financial, but emotional and psychological. She looked at the photographs on the wall. One showed the day of the studio's opening, with all the employees smiling. Another was of Pedro on his first day of school, small and excited with the backpack she herself had sewn. There was also an old photo of Donna Celia, who had unfortunately passed away 2 years ago, but who left a legacy of kindness that Helena carried in her heart. Helena thought of Marcelo sometimes. She couldn't deny it. She wondered if he knew he had a son, if he ever felt curiosity, if he regretted the decision he made. But these thoughts no longer came loaded with pain or anger. They came only as distant reflections, like someone thinking about a book they read a long time ago that no longer causes the same impact. The truth was that Helena had moved on so completely that the past seemed to belong to someone else. The woman who was expelled from that penthouse on a rainy night no longer existed. She had died in that suffering and was reborn through work, struggle, and overcoming. The Helena of now was someone new, someone who built her own story without depending on anyone, without waiting for someone to come save her. On Saturday morning, Helena took Pedro to Barigui Park. He loved running among the trees, watching the ducks on the lake, climbing on the playground equipment. While her son played, Helena sat on a bench and watched other families around her. There were couples with children, grandparents with grandchildren, groups of friends, each with their own story, their own struggles, their own victories. A woman sat beside her, also watching the children play. They began talking naturally, and the woman commented on how difficult it was to balance work and motherhood. Helena agreed, and when the woman asked what she did, Helena explained about the studio, about sustainable fashion, about the team of women who worked with her. The woman was impressed and asked if Helena had built it all alone. Helena smiled and said yes, but that alone was a relative word. She said she had help from incredible people along the way, people who believed in her when she had nothing to offer but determination. She said strength didn't come from being isolated, but from knowing how to accept an outstretched hand when it appeared, and from stretching out your own hand when someone needed it. That casual conversation in the park stayed in Helena's mind throughout the weekend. It made her reflect on how far she had come, not just in material terms, but in terms of who she had become. She was no longer that insecure woman who depended on someone to feel complete. She was someone who knew her value, who built her own security, who created and generated a positive impact on the lives of other people. On Monday, the magazine reporter arrived at the studio for the interview. She was a young woman full of energy who asked insightful questions about the business, about sustainability, about the social impact of the work Helena developed. But the question that touched Helena the most was the last one. The reporter asked what was the greatest pride she felt in relation to everything she had built. Helena thought for a moment and then answered. She said her greatest pride wasn't the studio itself, nor the products, nor the recognition. It was looking back and realizing she had transformed the worst experience of her life into fuel to create something meaningful. It was knowing she managed to raise her son in an environment of dignity and love, even without resources or support. It was having proved to herself that she didn't need inherited wealth or someone to support her. She was capable of supporting herself, and more than that, she was capable of helping other women do the same. That interview would be published the following month, but the words she said kept echoing inside her. It was true. Helena had transformed pain into purpose, and that transformation didn't depend on anyone but herself. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Marcelo read for the third time an article about sustainable fashion that briefly mentioned a promising studio in Santa Felicidade. The studio's name was Helena Cardoso. He researched further, found photos of the space, saw images of some pieces, and finally found a photograph of the owner. It was her. She was older, with different hair, but it was unequivocally Helena. Marcelo felt his heart race. After all these years watching from afar, hesitating, procrastinating, he finally had concrete confirmation of where she was and what she had become. The article mentioned participation in a fashion fair in São Paulo the following month. It would be there, Marcelo decided, that he would finally have the courage to face her, to say everything that needed to be said. Helena, that same night, was packing the first pieces of the collection to be sent to São Paulo. Pedro helped her, folding the tissue paper that wrapped each product. He asked if his mother was nervous about the trip, and Helena said yes, a little, but that it was a good kind of nervousness, the kind felt by someone about to take an important step. She looked at her son and said something he might not completely understand now, but that he would carry with him. She said that in life, things didn't always happen as we planned, that sometimes we were tested in ways that seemed unfair, but that what defined who we were wasn't what happened to us, but how we chose to respond. She said she had chosen to fight, to create, to build, and that choice had made all the difference. Pedro hugged his mother and said she was the strongest person he knew. Helena felt her eyes well up, but they were tears of gratitude, not sadness. She had an incredible son, a prosperous business, a life she built with her own hands. No matter what the future held, she knew she was ready to face it because she had learned the greatest lesson of all. She didn't need anyone to be complete. She already was. The Sustainable Fashion Fair occupied 3 floors of an event center in São Paulo. Brands from all over Brazil gathered to show their creations, connect with buyers, and celebrate conscious fashion. The Helena Cardoso studio booth was on the 2nd floor, strategically positioned near the main entrance. Helena had gone all out on the setup, creating a space that reflected the essence of the brand with reclaimed wood panels, natural plants, and the pieces displayed like works of art. Pedro was by his mother's side, helping to organize smaller bags on a shelf. Jessica took care of receiving the first visitors who began circulating through the corridors. The event was still on its first day, but there was already intense movement, with buyers and store owners circulating, making contacts, closing partnerships. Helena was explaining the origin of the fabrics of a piece to a potential client when she felt a shiver run down her spine. It was that strange feeling of being watched. She turned discreetly, and that was when she saw him. Marcelo was a few meters away, standing in front of the booth looking directly at her. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. 6 years had passed since the last time they were in the same room. Helena felt her heart race, but it wasn't the nervousness of before. It was something different, a mixture of surprise and a strange calm, as if that moment were inevitable, and she was already somehow prepared for it. Marcelo looked different, thinner with some grey hairs that didn't exist before, a tired expression that contrasted with the arrogant confidence he used to display. He took a few steps towards the booth, hesitant, as if he wasn't sure if he would be welcome. Pedro noticed the movement and looked curiously at the man approaching. Helena excused herself from the client, asked Jessica to stay with Pedro for a moment, and walked over to Marcelo. They met in a more private corner of the booth, away from curious eyes. The silence between them was dense, loaded with years of absence, of words not said, of choices that couldn't be undone. Marcelo was the first to speak. His voice came out shaky, loaded with emotion he clearly tried to control. He said he had searched for her for years, that he discovered the truth about the photographs, that he was deceived by someone close. He said Helena never betrayed him, that it was all an elaborate lie, a cruel manipulation. He asked for forgiveness, saying he made the biggest mistake of his life by not believing her, by not investigating before making that terrible decision. Helena listened to him in silence, without interrupting, without showing emotion. When Marcelo finished, she took a deep breath before answering. She said she already knew the photographs were fake. She always knew. But she also said that didn't change what really mattered. Marcelo didn't believe her. He didn't give her the benefit of the doubt. He didn't fight for their marriage. He chose the easy path, expelling her and moving on without looking back. Marcelo tried to argue, saying he was manipulated, that he wasn't thinking straight, that if he could go back in time he would do everything differently. Helena shook her head slowly. She said the past couldn't be changed, that his mistake wasn't just believing the photographs, it was not knowing her truly, not trusting the love they shared. If he knew her, if he trusted her, he would have questioned, investigated, fought for the truth. But he didn't. And that choice revealed something she needed to know, even if it was in the most painful way possible. Marcelo looked at the booth, at the pieces displayed, at the movement of people interested in Helena's work. He asked how she managed to build all that, alone, without resources. Helena smiled for the first time since they started talking, but it wasn't a smile of happiness. It was of pride mixed with irony. She said she succeeded because she had no alternative, because she needed to discover strengths she didn't even know existed, because she transformed despair into determination. It was then that Marcelo asked about his son. Helena felt her stomach tighten. She looked in the direction where Pedro was, helping Jessica pack a sail. She said his name was Pedro, that he was 6 years old, that he was an incredible child, full of life, curious, kind. She also said he knew of his father's existence, but had grown up without needing him, that he had a family built through love and choice, not just blood. Marcelo asked to meet him. Helena hesitated. That was the moment she always knew would come, but was never sure what it would be like. She looked at Marcelo, really looked, and saw a man broken by the weight of his own choices. She didn't feel pity, but she didn't feel anger either. She felt only the certainty that he no longer had power over her, that his presence or absence no longer defined who she was. She said Marcelo could meet Pedro, but with very clear conditions. Not as a father who returned repentant, expecting to regain a place he abandoned, but as someone who wanted to start building something new, from scratch, respecting the child's time and feelings. She also said that she, Helena, was no longer the same person he expelled from the house. She had her own life, her own achievements, and was not looking for salvation or for someone to complete her. She was already complete. Marcelo accepted the conditions, knowing he was in no position to demand anything. Helena called Pedro, who approached with the natural curiosity of children. She knelt down at her son's level and said, that was Marcelo, his father, someone who made a big mistake in the past but who wanted to meet him now. She asked if Pedro would like to talk to him. The boy looked at Marcelo with evaluating eyes, very similar to his mother's. He asked if he was rich, since Aunt Jessica had mentioned once that his father had a lot of money. Marcelo, disconcerted by the childish frankness, said yes, that he had a large company. Pedro then asked why he didn't help his mother when she needed it. The question fell like a bomb in the middle of that tense conversation. Marcelo had no answer for that. How to explain to a 6-year-old that he had been cowardly, proud, blind? How to say he chose to believe in lies because it was easier than facing the truth? He remained silent, and Pedro simply shrugged, as if the lack of an answer already told him everything he needed to know. Helena placed her hand on her son's shoulder and said it was an important question, but that maybe Marcelo hadn't found the right words to answer yet. She suggested they talk better on another occasion, in a more appropriate environment. Marcelo thanked her, asked for Helena's phone number to arrange it, and she gave him a studio business card. When Marcelo left, Helena sat in a chair at the back of the booth and took a deep breath. Jessica came to her, worried, and asked if everything was okay. Helena said yes, that she had finally closed a cycle that had been open for years. It hadn't been easy to see Marcelo again, but it hadn't been as difficult as she imagined. He no longer had the power to destabilize her, to make her question her value. He was just a man who made terrible mistakes and who would now have to live with the consequences. During the rest of the fair, Helena focused on what really mattered. She closed important partnerships, made valuable contacts, and received expansion proposals for other cities. The work she built with such effort was being recognized, and that was what really had meaning. Not Marcelo's appearance, not the late request for forgiveness, but the validation of everything she created alone. On the last day of the fair, Marcelo appeared again. This time he brought a folder with documents. He said he wanted to make a formal agreement on retroactive child support, that he wanted to financially compensate for all the years he wasn't present. Helena looked at the papers and then at him. She said she didn't want guilt money, that she didn't need financial compensation. Pedro had everything he needed. Nothing was missing. Marcelo insisted, saying it was his responsibility, that he wanted to do the right thing. Helena then made a counter-proposal. If he really wanted to help, he should create a fund to support other women in situations similar to what she went through. Women abandoned, without resources, trying to rebuild their lives. She said that would have much more value than any money deposited in her account. The suggestion took Marcelo by surprise. He expected Helena to accept the money, perhaps even to forgive him more easily if he compensated financially. But she was, once again, showing she wasn't who he thought she was. She wasn't interested in personal gain, but in making a real difference in the world. Marcelo agreed. He said he would create the fund, that he would invest in it as a way to honor everything Helena went through. He also asked if he could visit Pedro once in a while, if he could try to build some kind of relationship with his son. Helena said yes, but made it clear it would be on Pedro's time, respecting his feelings, without pressure, without expectations. If the boy wanted to get to know his father better, she wouldn't prevent it. But she wouldn't force anything either. Before leaving, Marcelo said something Helena realized was true. He said the greatest pain wasn't the regret for what he did, but the awareness of what he lost. He lost the chance to see Helena transform into this incredible woman. He lost his son's first years. He lost the opportunity to be part of something real, built with love and struggle. He lost all of that because of pride, because of cowardice, because of choosing the easy path instead of the right one. Helena said nothing. There was nothing to say. Marcelo was right, and that was a lesson only he could learn with himself. She had already learned her lessons, already overcome her own battles. What Marcelo would do with the late knowledge of the truth was no longer her problem. When the fair ended and Helena returned to Curitiba with Pedro and Jessica, she felt a lightness she didn't expect. The reunion with Marcelo, which she imagined would be devastating, or at least disturbing, ended up being liberating. It proved to herself that she had in fact moved on completely, that her happiness, her security, her completeness did not depend on him or any other person. That night, after putting Pedro to sleep, Helena sat in the backyard of the house and looked at the stars. She thought about everything she had lived through, every difficult moment, every small victory. She thought about the people who helped her along the way. Dona Celia, Seu Jorge, Dona Lourdes, Jessica, Marina, and so many others who reached out when she needed it. She also thought about herself, about the woman she was 6 years ago and the woman she had become. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, painful, but deeply meaningful process. Every step taken, every choice made, every challenge overcome shaped who she was now. And who she was now was someone who didn't need external validation, who didn't depend on anyone to feel whole. Helena's story wasn't about revenge or about proving something to Marcelo. It was about discovering that within her there always existed a strength she didn't know she had. It was about transforming abandonment into independence, pain into purpose, defeat into reconstruction. It was about learning that sometimes the greatest tragedies in life are, in fact, the pushes we need to become who we truly should be. Marcelo returned to Curitiba that same month, but in a different way. He created the fund he promised and began visiting Pedro once a month, always respectful, always grateful for every moment Helena allowed. Pedro, with the wisdom of children, accepted that new arrangement without drama, without demands. He had a father now, but that didn't change the fact that he had grown up well without him, surrounded by love and positive examples. Helena continued building her business, expanding to other cities, employing more women, and making a real difference in the lives of people who, like her once, needed an opportunity to start over. Each piece that left the studio carried not only the quality of the work, but the story of overcoming of the one who created it. The true turning point of Helena's story wasn't in Marcelo's return, nor in the request for forgiveness, nor in financial compensation. The true turning point was in the discovery that she never needed any of that. Since that rainy night she was expelled from the house, since the first days sleeping in the bakery storage room, since the moments of despair and uncertainty, Helena already carried within her everything she needed to rebuild her life. The abandonment that seemed like the end was, in fact, the beginning. The moment she lost everything was the moment she discovered she had something much more valuable than material wealth or security coming from others. She had her own strength, creativity, determination, and the capacity to transform any situation into an opportunity. Years later, when someone asked Helena if she forgave Marcelo, she answered with honesty. She said she forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because carrying a grudge would be giving him a power he no longer had. She forgave because moving on required leaving the past in its place as a lesson learned, not as an open wound. But forgiving didn't mean forgetting, nor did it mean giving up the boundaries she established. Helena built a new, complete, meaningful life, and nothing and no one would take that from her. Marcelo could be part of Pedro's life if he wanted, But he would never again be part of Helena's life the way he once was. That chapter was closed, and a new one had begun, written only by her, with her own hands, with her own strength. The story of Helena Cardoso wasn't about a woman who was betrayed, abandoned, and left behind. It was about a woman who fell, got up, and built something so solid, so true, so hers, that it became impossible to ignore. It was about discovering that true power is not in having everything, but in being capable of rebuilding everything from nothing. And in that reconstruction, in that impossible journey that she made possible, Helena found not just survival, but a complete, full, and deeply her own life. Dear listeners, we hope that Helena and Marcelo's story has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming and starting over, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you most in this story. Every day we bring intense narratives like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and show that the strength to start over always exists within us. We